Okay, guys, promising news on the fuel front. Crude oil prices have dropped below $100 a barrel for the first time since March. However, gas prices are still at a record high. This is a lot of people wondering what is behind these increases. So we've called in the big guns this morning to answer these questions. James Coleman from SMU, who studies energy law, is going to talk to us about this. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
Okay, my first question for you, I was saying you must be pretty busy answering a lot of phone calls from journalists right now. What's it been like in your office?
Well, it's been very busy. I just got back from Calgary in Canada, where I was speaking on oil prices as well. And obviously everyone here in Texas and around the world is very interested in what's going on in oil and gas markets.
Yeah, I think interested is the understatement right there. So, okay, the big question, what is causing these increases? How does this work?
Well, oil is traded in global markets, and that's just because of a great thing about oil, which is that there's a lot of energy packed into every gallon of oil, and so that means we trade it around the world. When there's a shortage one place, we send more oil to deal with it. The problem with that is that when there's a shortage anywhere in the world, we have prices rising right at your pump here in Texas. And so what's happened over the last year and a half is we've had a gradual run up in prices. If you went back to January 2021, you were talking about oil prices for a barrel of oil of just over $50 and for gasoline of about $2.30. And now both of those prices have basically doubled. We're talking about $100 barrel oil. So there's a gradual run up in prices, which came because we were using more oil than we expected and not producing quite as much oil as we expected all around the world. And that's gotten worse just in the last couple weeks with fears of new shortages of oil because of the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, because Russia is one of our biggest oil producers.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because I've seen some stats that show relatively they actually don't contribute that much, Russia, in that area. But we are seeing big changes. So talk to me a bit more about the Russia-Ukraine situation and how that's impacting what we see in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, so two things. One is Russia is a big oil producer. It's not as big as the U.S. It's the #2 oil producer. But secondly, there hasn't really been that much of a disruption to Russia's exports yet. And that's because the only countries that have really imposed a ban on importing Russian oil are the United States and to some extent the U.K. And neither of those countries, as you suggest, actually takes in that much Russian oil. So really, the run-up in oil prices that we've seen is more about the fear that there would be bigger disruptions to Russia's oil exports. And that could be either because the war causes it or there's increasing sanctions from countries in Europe that do import a lot of Russian oil, or because Russia at some point decides they don't want to send us oil anymore. So far, none of that has happened because Europe needs Russian oil and Russia needs the money that we're sending them every day for their oil and gas, which is about $1 billion a day.
Okay, last question for me. You go to the gas station, maybe it's one price across the street, another one across the way. A lot of people kind of take it out on the staff at these gas stations. I would imagine they have very little to do with the pricing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And as we said, those oil prices really depend on things that are going on all around the world. So the individual gas, the individual gas station really itself has very little control over those prices, which might swing wildly. We're seeing them fall today, in fact, because we're worried about the economy in China, so maybe we won't use as much. So it really has very little to do with the actual gas station where you're going to.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning and explaining that. It may not help us at the pump, but it helps us understand it at least. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, you're welcome.
Okay, and one thing I also want to share with you guys is advice on how you can actually save at least while you're driving, while we still have these high prices. So AAA says slow down, drive the speed limit. That will actually help. They also say avoid jackrabbit starts and hard accelerations. Use cruise control on the highway. However, never use cruise control on slippery roads. Minimize your use of air conditioning. Avoid extended idling to warm up the engine, even in colder temperatures. It is unnecessary and it also wastes your gas. Maintain your car according to manufacturer's recommendations. That can make a huge difference, guys. And make sure your tires are properly maintained and inflated to the correct level. And when it comes to finding the cheapest fuel, we do have you covered, guys. If you text the word gas to 214-977-6028, we'll reply with a link to the 10 cheapest gas stations in North Texas.